In Tableau, we have many different functions that we can use inside the calculations. And in Tableau, we can categorize them into 4 different types of calculations. In this tutorial, we're going to talk about them, but first we're going to have a very simple example to understand how they work and how they interact with each other. So let's go. Alright, so now let's say that we have the following product table inside our data source where we have informations like the product, prices, quantities, and so on. Those data are the original data that we can find inside the data source. And now let's say that we need a new field inside our data source to show the data of the revenue. In order to do that, we can simply create a new calculated field where it's gonna multiply the prices with the quantities. So now with that, Tableau gonna go and create a new field inside our data source to store the result of the calculations inside it. So Tableau gonna go row by multiplying the prices with the quantity. So for example, for the first row, it's gonna multiply 20 with 2, and Tableau gonna go and store it as a new field. Then Tableau gonna jump to the next row and do the same exact thing. So as you can see, Tableau is processing each rows individually and independently from each others. When the calculations is happening on one row, we don't care about the information that is present in the other rows. So Tableau gonna focus only on one row at a time. This type of calculations, we call it row level calculations, and the level of details we have it here is the lowest. So we have the level of detail from the data source. It's very important to understand that this type of calculations is the only type that will not go and aggregate the rows of the data source, and as well the only type that's gonna store the results at the data source. So that means Tableau will not go and calculate the result of these calculations each time you are using it in the visualizations. So it's gonna like pre-calculate it and store it in the data source, and the calculation will not be done on the fly. Alright, so now let's move to the visualizations, and let's say that I would like to show the total revenue of each product. And for that, we can use the function sum to summarize the values of the revenue, and we can go and add the dimension product to the view. And Tableau here gonna show only 3 rows in the view, a row for each product value. So that means we're gonna have P1, P2, and P3. Now this time Tableau will start summarizing and aggregating the rows in the data source, and that's gonna be at the level of the dimension. So for example, Tableau gonna start with the first product, the P1, and Tableau gonna summarize the first 2 rows from the data source. So we have 40 plus 60. Tableau gonna write at the output 100 directly in the visualization. Then it's gonna move to the next row. We have the P2. Here we have only 1 row at the data source, and the summarize of that's gonna be 20. And for the product 3, the P3, we have here 3 rows in the data source. So the summarization of 40 plus 25 plus 15, Tableau gonna have the answer 80 at the visualizations. So this time, as you can see, Tableau is not processing the rows of the data source one by one and individually. Instead, Tableau gonna go and summarize, group up the rows of the data source at the visualization level. This type of calculations, we call it aggregate calculations, and it's gonna be calculated on the fly. That means the result of these functions of those calculations will not be extra stored inside the data source. And now it's very important to understand the level of details of this new table that we have in the view. It has lower level of details as the data source, and the one who controls the level of details is the dimension that we have on the view. So the dimension that we use in the view gonna control the level of details for the aggregate calculations. And that's why we have another type of calculations. Because of that, let's say that we have another scenario where you say, you know what, I would like to control the level of details. I want my calculations to show the total revenue of each category. So here we can use different functions like the fixed function. So we're gonna have fixed category and then sum the revenue. So that we are telling Tableau, okay, find the total revenue, but this time it's gonna be fixed, it's gonna be connected to the dimension category. So let me show you what's gonna happen. Tableau gonna go and check, okay, what is the category of P1? It is the category A. And now the next question, what is the total revenue of the category A? So here Tableau gonna summarize 40 plus 60 plus 20, and the result gonna be 120. And here Tableau will not show the total revenue of the product P1, but instead of that, we are showing the total revenue of the category A. The same thing can happen for the next product. We have P2, it belongs to the same category, to A, so the total revenue of category A is again 120. And then the last product, P3, it belongs to different category, this time to category P, and the total revenue of that's gonna be 40 plus 25 plus 15, the output gonna be 80 as the total revenue for the category B. So now who is controlling the aggregations? It's not anymore the dimension that we have on the view, but instead it's gonna be the dimension that we specify on the calculations. This type of calculations we call it LOD expressions, level of details expressions. And here the same thing like the aggregations, it's gonna happen on the fly, nothing gonna be stored inside the data source. Alright, so now moving on to the last calculation type that we have in Tableau. Let's say that after I got the result in the view, I would like to calculate the rank of the products based on the data that is displayed in the view. And in order to do that, we can use the function rank of the summary of the revenue. So what can happen this time, Tableau will not go and query the data source. Instead of that, Tableau can go and query the visualization itself. So here it's like we are aggregating the aggregation. So based on the value that is displayed on the view, we can find that the product 1, P1, has the rank 1, then P2 has the rank 3, and P3 has the rank 2. This type of calculations, we call it table calculations, and it is unlike all other types, it is based on the context and on the data that is displayed on the view. And it will not go directly and query the data source. It is as well computed on the fly. That means the result will not be stored inside the data source. And if we are talking about the level of details, it depends as well on the visualization. So it's going to depend on the dimension products. Alright guys, so with that we have now a big picture about the 4 different types of calculations inside Tableau, and we can see how Tableau going to compute the calculations and present the data at the end in the results. Alright, so now we're going to start with the first type of calculations. We have the row level calculations, and here we have a lot of functions under this category if you compare it with the other types. So here we have the number functions, string, date, null, logical functions. There are a lot of functions, but we're going to cover them all in the next tutorials. So now let's go in Tableau and try a few of those calculations. Okay, so now back to Tableau, we're gonna go to the small data source, and then we're gonna go to the orders. As you can see, we have here the quantity and as well the unit price. Now we're gonna go and calculate the revenue, where we're gonna multiply the quantity with the unit price. In order to do that, we're gonna create a new calculated fields in the data source, and this is gonna be a row level calculations type. So let's go and create a new calculated field. So we're gonna go to the data pane, right click on the empty space, create calculated field, and let's give it the name revenue, and then the formula for this is going to be quantity multiplied with the unit price. And now you might ask me, where do I find in Tableau all the functions that are related to the type row level calculations? Well, there is no specific place for that, but there's like orientations for it. So if you go to the documentation over here and check those groups, you will not find directly the types of the calculations, but you will find some groups that are similar to those types. For example, if you can see over here, we have the table calculations. If you go inside it, you're gonna find all the functions that we could use in this type. And then we have another group called aggregate. And here you will not find only the aggregate calculations, but as well you will find the LOD expressions. And the last one, the last type, is the row level calculations, is actually the rest. So all other like the number, string, date, type conversions, all of those stuff are row level calculations. Alright, so now back to our calculations. Let's go over here and hit OK. And with that, you can see that Tableau did immediately create a new field in our data pane. And now, as I told you, if you are using row level calculations, Tableau gonna do the pre-calculations and store the results immediately in the data source. Let's go and check that. Either you can go to the data source page, or we can go to this small icon over here. It says view data. So let's go inside and check the results. Here we have to switch to the orders. And now let's scroll to the right. You can see we have the original field, we have the quantity, and as well the unit price. But we have as well our new calculated field, which is like any other field that we have in the data source. We have the revenue over here, and as you can see, Tableau did immediately store all the results of this calculated field in the data source, even though that we haven't created anything yet in the visualizations. So that means Tableau gonna prepare it for you in the data source, and we can check the result. For example, here we have the quantity 1, the unit price 215. We're gonna get the same, of course, and here the things are multiplied with 2. So as you can see, we are now multiplying the quantity with the unit price, and now we can see very clearly that the row level calculations will be calculated and performed on the row level individually and independently from each others. So the information that we have in the other rows will not affect the calculations of the first row. Alright guys, so that's it. This is how the row level calculations works in Tableau. Okay, so now we're going to move to the next type of calculations. We have the aggregate calculations, and here we have few calculations if you compare to the row level calculations. We have max, min, average, count, count distinct, sum, and attribute. Again, all of those going to be covered in details in next tutorials, but now we're going to go in Tableau and try a few of them. Alright everyone, so now we're going to go and build a view where we have the total revenue by products. In order to do that, we're going to go and get the product name from the small data source, and let's put it in the view. Now it's really important to understand the concepts. So now the product name is the dimension that can define the level of details in these visualizations. So that means in this view we have 5 rows, and this is completely controlled by the product name. So now I want you to understand how to pick which type of calculations we're going to use now to answer this question. We start always with the first question: do we have to aggregate the data? Since the task saying the total revenue, that means there is like an aggregation and summarizations. Well, that means we cannot use the row level calculations, then we have to use the other types for aggregations. Then we are left with the 3 types. Now the next question gonna be, do we have all the data in the view? Well, as you can see in our table, we have only the dimension informations. We don't have anything about the revenue. So that means no, we don't have all the data inside the view, and that's gonna means we will not use table calculations type, because the table calculations types always depend on the view. So if you don't have the data in the view, you cannot use table calculations. With that, we are left with 2 options. Either we can use the aggregate calculations or the LOD calculations. Well, the last question you're gonna ask, does the level of details that we have in the view gonna fulfill my requirements? Well, in this example, yes, because we want to have the total revenue by products. So we are talking about the products, and the dimension that we have inside the view exactly fulfill the level of details. So that means we can stay with the level of calculations that we have inside the view, and we don't need to use any LOD expressions. So if you follow those 3 simple questions, you can easily identify which type of calculations you need to solve your task. And in this example, it's going to be the aggregate calculations. So let's see how we can do that. And since the aggregate calculations are the default methods in Tableau in order to aggregate any data or any measure, it's going to be really easy to create. So all what we need is the revenue. So just drag and drop it here on top of those numbers. And with that, Tableau going to create immediately an aggregate calculations. We can see it over here, the sum of the revenue, and that's because it is the default methods on aggregating data. Tableau goes for each product inside the data and start aggregating all the revenues that are related to this product. And now the next step, what I usually do, I go and validate some examples. So I go and pick some of those products and start summarizing the value to check whether the value that I'm seeing in the visualizations is correct. Let's go and create a new sheet, and here we want to go to the lowest level. In order to do that, we're going to take the order ID, the view, and let's take now the product name. We can take the categories as well, and then let's take the revenue and put it on the APC over here. Let's make it a little bit bigger in order to see the names, and then we can go and sort the product names. So now we can go and pick any of those products in order to validate the answer. Let's take the LG Full HD monitor. As you can see, the total sum should be more than 3,000. So let's go back to our aggregations and check the LG Full HD. You can see it is above the 3,000. That means everything is fine, and with that we got the total revenue by products. And of course we have done this in the quick way where we drag and drop the field to the view, but if you want to do it as calculated field in order to reuse it later in different sheets, we can go and create a new calculated fields. Let's call it total revenue, and then we're gonna have the same syntax, so the sum of revenue, and this time we're gonna use the nested calculations. So we have it already in another calculated field, so let's go and click on that, and as you can see the calculation is valid. Let's hit OK, and we got with that a new measure in our data pane. So if you go and replace it, you will get exact results. So as you can see in the result, nothing's changed. The only advantage to use this is to reuse it in different sheets and as well in different workbooks. Alright guys, so that's all for the aggregate calculations in Tableau. Alright, Alright guys, the third type of calculations in Tableau, we have the LOD calculations, or the level of details expressions. And here we have only 3 Tableau functions. We have the fixed, include, and exclude. So now let's go in Tableau and create one of those functions. Alright, so now we have the following task where we want to show the total revenue by category, but using the same view. So we're gonna stay with the same informations. We're gonna have the product name, we're gonna have the total revenue by the product, but I want to see side by side their total revenue by category. So let's go again through the 3 questions. The first question is, are we doing aggregations? Well, yes, that means we cannot use row level calculations. Then the next questions, are the data that we have in the view enough? Well, it's not. Here, it's not the total revenue by category, it's by the product. Well, that means we cannot use the table calculations. Now we come to the last question. Does the level of details in the view gonna support me to solve the task? Well, the answer is no. And that's because the level of details inside the view now defined by the product name, and it has higher level of details than the category. We want to have the total revenue by category. So the level of details that we have in the view will not support me. That's why I cannot use here aggregate calculations, and I have to go and use LOD expressions. So as you can see, very simple questions, and it's gonna move you exactly to the right type of calculations in Tableau. And now you might say, wait. I can go and add the category informations to the view, and then I have the level of details of the category. Well, this will not work, and that's because the product name has a higher level of details. Let me show you what can happen if you bring the category. So let's go and grab the category to the right side over here. You can see nothing gonna change. We still are at the 5 rows, and that's because of the product name. Even if you move it to the left side over here, we don't have here 2 rows. We have here 5 rows. If you can check the details over here, we have 5 marks. So that's why even if you are adding the category, nothing gonna change. We are still with the product level of details. So now let's go and create a new calculated field to use the LOD expressions or calculations. So let's go to the left side and create a new calculated field. We're gonna call it total revenue by category. And the syntax, don't worry about it. We're gonna learn it in a separate tutorial about it. So it's gonna have the following syntax: fixed. Then we have to specify the dimension that's gonna control the level of details of the results. It's gonna be the category. And then what we are doing, we are aggregating the revenue. So we have to add here sum of revenue, and then we have to close it. So that's it, the calculation is valid and everything is fine. Let's go and hit OK. So as usual, we're gonna get a new calculated field in our data pane over here. So let's get the result and let's drag it over here to see the data. So we can see for each row the total revenue by the category. So for the first one, it's gonna be the total revenue by the accessories. The second one the same because it belongs to the same category. The third one the same, but the fourth one you can see it belongs to a different category, and that's why we're gonna get different numbers. So that's it. This is why we need LOD calculations in Tableau. Okay, so now we're gonna move to the last type of calculations that we have, the table calculations. And here we have as well few calculations. So we have the running, window, rank, first, last, index, lookup, and so on. Again, here we're gonna have dedicated tutorial for those stuff, but now let's go and try one of them. All right, everyone, so now we're gonna move to the last task for this view. We want to show the running total of the revenue by the products. So here we're gonna ask again the 3 questions. Are we aggregating? Well, yes, because we are having the running total of the revenue, so we cannot use the row level calculations. The next questions, are the data that we have in the visualizations are enough to solve this task? Well, yes. And that's because we have the total revenue by the products and the view, and based on those informations, we can build up the running total of the revenue by the product. So we have actually everything in the view in order to solve the tasks. And that's why we're gonna go and use the type table calculations, and we will not bother with the third question, whether it's aggregated calculations or LOD, because it is table calculations. So let's go and create a new calculated field. We're gonna call it running total revenue. So the syntax for that is as well very simple. We start with the running, then we have to select which aggregation type. It's gonna be the sum. And then we have to go and specify which data going to be calculated inside this table calculations. And here we have only 2 informations. So either we're going to use the total revenue or the total revenue by category, the LOD, but we are talking about the total revenue by products. That's why we're going to include it over here. So it's going to be the sum of the revenue, and that's it. And the calculation is valid. So let's go and hit OK. And we're going to take our measure and put it as well in the view to check the results. So with that, we can see very nicely the running total of the revenue. It's very simple. It starts with the first value from the total revenue, then the next value going to be based on the previous value plus the total revenue. So those two values going to be added to each other in order to get this value. Then the next one, the same. So the previous value plus the current total revenue. As you can see, we have nothing here. That's why we are getting the same value. So as you can see, as we are moving down, we are adding more total revenues to the total number. And now it's very important to understand that the table calculations are very sensitive to the data that is displayed in the view. So any change to this structure, we're going to get different numbers at the output. And this is not the case for the aggregate or the LOD calculations. Let me show you what I mean. For example, let's go and just change the sort of the data inside the product name. So let's go over here and make it descending. For example, you can see that the aggregate calculations or the LOD, the values are the same. It just changed the sort, but the values inside the table calculations did change completely because we have now different sort, and Tableau gonna recalculate the running total based on the view. So that means any interactions in the visualizations, it's gonna affect the table calculations functions, and it is completely based on the view. So that's it for now. This is about the table calculations in Tableau. Alright guys, so now we're going to talk about the order of computations of those different calculations types that we have in Tableau. So now let's say that we have the following calculations, and it's very similar to the nested calculations. Here we have different types. So we have the rank for the table calculations, we have the sum as an aggregate calculations, and we have the quantity multiplied with the price as a row level calculations. So the first thing to be executed is always the row level calculations. So the first one gonna be quantity multiplied with the price. Then the second type to be executed in Tableau gonna be the aggregate calculations. It's gonna be the sum function in Tableau. And the last type of calculations that's gonna be executed in Tableau gonna be the rank function, the table calculations. So again, row level calculations as a first, then the aggregate calculations, and always the last one, the table calculations. Okay, so now let's go and quickly recap how to choose the right calculation type. Here we have 3 questions. We start with the first one. Do you have the aggregated data? If no, then go and use the row level calculations. We are at the row level. If yes, then we jump to the next question. Is all the needed data already available in the visualizations? If yes, then we can use the table calculations. If no, then we have here the third question. Is the level of details in the visualizations matches the question or the requirements? If yes, then we can use the aggregate calculations. If no, we can go and use the LOD expressions or calculations. So if you follow my decision tree, you can simply find an answer for that. Alright guys, so with that you have now an overview of the different types of calculations that we have in Tableau. Next we're gonna do a deep dive in each type of them, and we will start with the row level calculations. Here we're gonna cover a lot of functions in Tableau that are very important to do data manipulations and transformations, and generate as well new informations that you need for your visualizations. And if you like my content and you want to support the channel, then I really appreciate it if you support, like, and comment. This really gonna help the YouTube algorithm. Thank you so much for watching, and I will see you in the next video. Bye.